Some killers hide in the shadows. Some blend into the background. Some become invisible, forgotten, unnoticed, until their crimes push them into the light. But then, there are the predators who don't hide at all. The ones who kill while smiling. The ones who walk into courtrooms shaking hands. The ones who laugh in front of news cameras. The ones who wear uniforms, badges, and authority, not as symbols of protection, but as shields to commit abuse. This is one of those stories. This is the story of Drew Peterson, a suburban Illinois police sergeant who spent decades cultivating the image of a charming, confident, decorated officer, while privately becoming one of America's most manipulative, controlling, and dangerous men. A man who believed the law couldn't touch him. A man who believed his badge made him invincible. A man who believed that, if he killed his wives, no one would ever dare question him. And for a long time, he was right. This story spans 4 marriages, 2 mysterious deaths, 1 vanished young woman, and a trail of warnings ignored by police, courts, judges, neighbors, and even the people who worked beside him. A story of a man who hid behind authority, and a system that let him get away with it. A story of victims who tried to escape him, and a man who made escaping impossible. A story of narcissism, control, manipulation, and the psychological unraveling of a man who believed women were property, and consequences were for everyone else. This documentary will take you deep into the life of Drew Peterson, the wives he controlled and terrorized, the warning signs ignored again and again, the death ruled accidental that was anything but, the disappearance that changed everything, the trial that shattered a legal boundary, the creation of the hearsay law many now call the Drew Peterson law, and the chilling question that still haunts investigators today. Where is Stacy Peterson? But before all of that, before the headlines, the interviews, the search teams, the nationwide obsession, we have to start where all monsters begin, with the illusion of normal. Because Drew Peterson wasn't born a killer. He wasn't born a manipulator. He wasn't born a man who would treat women like possessions he could discard. He was born ordinary. He grew up in a quiet neighborhood. He went to school. He joined the police academy. He married his high school sweetheart. And that is exactly what makes his transformation so terrifying. This isn't the story of a man who snapped. This isn't the story of a moment of rage. This is the story of a personality slowly rotting from the inside out. A story of ego swelling with power, control fed by authority, violence trained into confidence, and a belief, a deadly belief, that he was smarter than everyone else. Drew Peterson's psychological descent was not sudden. It was incremental, slow, poisonous. A drip of narcissism, a dose of entitlement, a growing addiction to dominance, a series of wives who tried to escape him, and a series of failures by the system that should have protected them. For decades, Drew Peterson was the man people called when they needed help. Until the people who needed help were the ones living under his roof. Men like him don't just kill bodies. They kill identities. They kill confidence. They kill freedom. They kill the very idea that someone could leave them. And when leaving becomes impossible, disappearance becomes the only outcome left. Tonight, we peel back every layer of this case. The lies, the marriages, the patterns, the fear, the cunning, the power he held, the bodies he left behind, the woman who vanished without a trace, the ex-wife who predicted her own death, the courtroom drama unlike any other, and the truth that finally brought Drew Peterson down. This is not just a true crime story. This is a psychological study in coercive control, predatory behavior, narcissistic entitlement, and how a man with a badge can become a god in his own home. This is the story of the cop who thought he could kill and walk away. The man who laughed at reporters. The man who flirted on national TV. The man who bagged groceries while police searched for his missing wife. The man who threatened his exes with lines like, "I could kill you and make it look like an accident." And for years, no one listened. In this episode, we will make sure their voices are finally heard. Because before we can understand the murders, before we can understand Stacy's disappearance, before we can understand the arrogance, the smirk, the public meltdown, before we can understand the trial that changed everything, we have to go back. Back to where it all began. Back to the beginning of a man who was supposed to uphold the law, but instead used it as his personal hunting ground. Every villain has an origin story, and this one starts in Bolingbrook, Illinois. Inside a police department that trusted Drew Peterson, and inside marriages that were doomed from the moment they began. This is the Drew Peterson case, and this is the beginning. Before Drew Peterson became a headline, before he became a courtroom spectacle, before he became the smirking face of a murder trial watched around the nation, he was something far more dangerous. He was respected, he was trusted, he was admired. He was the kind of officer who brought his neighbor's trash cans in without being asked. He held babies for family photos. He helped elderly residents fix their porch lights. He volunteered for extra shifts. He mentored younger officers. He escorted kids across the street during school events. He looked like the ideal police officer. And sometimes, the most dangerous predators aren't the ones hiding in the dark. They're the ones shaking your hand. 1. Bolingbrook, Illinois, a community that loved their cop. In the 1980s and 1990s, Bolingbrook, Illinois was rapidly growing. A suburban community filled with families, new developments, stable jobs, friendly neighbors, a small town feel. And in communities like this, a police officer wasn't just a uniform. He was a figure of trust you nodded to in the grocery store, someone you waved to while walking your dog, someone you let into your home without a second thought. And among the officers of Bolingbrook, one name stood out: Sergeant Drew Peterson. He was charismatic, outgoing, sociable, always eager to talk, always willing to help, always projecting the image of a man in control. Residents liked him. Coworkers respected him. Supervisors trusted him. Behind that badge was a man who understood something critical. People believe what they see. And Drew made sure they saw exactly what he wanted them to. 2. The boy who grew into a charmer. Drew Walter Peterson was born on January 5, 1954. Nothing in his childhood screamed future killer. No violent past, no criminal family, no glaring trauma. He grew up in a typical suburban home. Plenty of friends, good grades, a natural ability to charm adults and peers alike. But even early on, people noticed something. Drew always needed to win. Whether it was sports, arguments, or attention. He needed to be the center of gravity in every room. A childhood friend later recalled, Drew always had to be the funniest, the smartest, the guy in control. And he couldn't handle being questioned. This isn't unusual. Lots of teenagers seek attention. But for Drew, that attention wasn't a phase. It was identity. It was survival. It was oxygen. It was fuel. and it became the blueprint for everything he would become. Free, the allure of the badge. When Drew Peterson joined the military in the early 1970s and later entered the police academy, it wasn't just a career choice. It was the perfect stage for his personality. The badge offered authority, respect, power, obedience, social status. And for a man who thrived on control, the police world was paradise. Inside the academy, he excelled. He learned quickly. He followed orders. He acted confident. He adapted. And he loved the authority that came with the uniform. Loved the way people instantly listened to him. Loved the way the badge elevated him above others. Loved the way he could command a situation with nothing more than a stern tone. Law enforcement didn't change Drew. It amplified him. It turned his need for dominance into a weapon. It turned his charm into a disguise. It turned his ego into a badge of credibility. By the time he was sworn in, Drew Peterson was already stepping into a role he believed he was born to play: the untouchable cop. 4. A department that protected its own. One of the darker realities of police culture, especially in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, is the mentality known as the blue wall. The unwritten rule: you protect your own. You don't report the flaws of another officer. You don't question misconduct. You don't expose the cracks. And Drew understood this very, very well. Drew's coworkers described him as confident, helpful, friendly, efficient. He was the guy you could rely on to handle a difficult call. The guy who would back you up in a bar fight. The guy who would never leave a fellow officer stranded. But there was another side. There were rumors of anger issues, inappropriate behavior, controlling tendencies, arrogance. Still, supervisors brushed it off. He was a good cop, a productive cop, a decorated cop. He didn't raise red flags because no one wanted to see them. One former officer put it best: Drew knew how to work the system. He made himself useful. And in policing, useful people get protected. And that protection was the foundation that allowed everything else to happen. 5. The charming officer with a dark private life. Publicly, Drew was charming. Privately, Drew was controlling. Friends noticed. He monitored his partners. He made decisions unilaterally. He used aggressive humor. He joked about domination. He didn't handle rejection well. But charm is a powerful mask, and Drew was an expert at wearing masks. He could switch personalities as easily as flipping a switch. Charming with neighbors, authoritative with coworkers, joking with friends, controlling at home, manipulative with partners. People who later crossed paths with him would describe him with the same unsettling words. He smiled with his mouth, not his eyes. But again, he was a cop. Authority. And the people closest to him, the people living inside his home, were the ones who began to see the real Drew Peterson. 6. The pattern begins. Charm, control, collapse. Drew's relationships followed a script. Charm. He was romantic, funny, engaging, attentive, and overwhelming in his affection. Control. Slowly, subtly, he began to dictate decisions. Where she went, who she talked to, what she wore, how she behaved, how frequently she checked in. Domination. The charm would fade. The pressure would rise. Arguments grew sharper. Threats became more common. The badge became a tool of intimidation. Collapse. The woman would try to leave, escape, or get help. Drew would retaliate, sometimes emotionally, sometimes physically, always with control. Repeat. If she escaped, Drew found someone new. someone younger, more vulnerable, more impressionable. This pattern began early, and it never stopped. 7. Why no one stopped him. There are 4 devastating reasons why Drew Peterson slipped through the cracks for decades. He was a cop. He knew the system. He knew the law. He knew exactly what he could get away with. He was charming. People liked him. People trusted him. People believed him over his wives. His victims were isolated. He controlled their lives, their money, their movements, their safety. Domestic violence wasn't taken seriously. In the 80s and 90s, women reporting abuse, especially by an officer, were often dismissed. And Drew Peterson became an expert at identifying these weaknesses. 8. The foreshadowing everyone missed. Long before Kathleen Savio died, long before Stacy vanished, long before the nation whispered serial wife killer, there were warning signs, lots of them. A friend from the academy once said, Drew always thought rules applied to everyone else, not him. A former coworker recalled, he liked control, he needed it. A past girlfriend confessed, he didn't get angry, he got dangerous. And his later wives would describe intimidation, threats, monitoring, disappearing their money, emotional isolation, physical violence. Drew Peterson didn't suddenly turn into a monster. He grew into one. He practiced. He perfected. He learned. And because he was charming, because he was confident, because he was a police officer, no one stopped him. 9. The stage is set. By the late 1970s, Drew Peterson looked like a rising star. Young, attractive, intelligent, ambitious, talented, respected. He was the kind of officer a department would proudly put on the front page of a community newsletter. But behind the public image, his personal life was already fracturing, already rotting, already becoming a blueprint for horror. Because the same qualities that earned him recognition on duty, discipline, confidence, command, authority, were the same qualities that made him dangerous at home. Before Drew Peterson ever killed, before he ever hit a body, before he ever intimidated a witness, he learned something essential. Charm can open doors, authority can close mouths, and power can make you unstoppable. The first cracks in Drew Peterson's private life would appear with wife number 1, Carol Brown. She survived, but she saw things early. She felt the control growing around her. She felt the danger before anyone else, and she would become the first woman to say the words that the world ignored. He will kill someone someday. She had no idea how right she was. When people look back at the Drew Peterson case, they often focus on the final wives. Kathleen Savio, found dead in her bathtub, and Stacy Peterson, who vanished without a trace. But to understand how Drew became the man at the center of those tragedies, we have to go back to the very beginning. Back to wife number 1, Carol Brown, the first woman who married him, the first woman who tried to love him, the first woman who realized something wasn't right, and the first woman to escape. She survived. But what she saw, what she lived through, became the blueprint for everything that came after. Because every monster has an origin, and every pattern has a beginning. This is where the pattern starts. 1. Young love, young dreams, and the first cracks. Carol Brown met Drew Peterson as a teenager. He was charming, flirty, funny, quick with compliments, confident in a way young women often mistake for stability. He wasn't a cop yet, just a charismatic, ambitious young man who seemed like he had big plans and a bright future. Carol was drawn to him. He made her feel special, seen, chosen. and Drew liked being admired. He liked being the center of her world. He liked being wanted. In the beginning, the relationship was light and fun. Dates, laughs, time together. First, attention from Drew came with a price. A subtle, creeping, barely noticeable price at first. Control. Who Carol talked to, where she went, what she wore, how much time she spent without him. At first, it looked like concern. Then it started looking like monitoring. Then it became something darker. Then Drew joined the military, and the distance between them changed everything. 2. Distance grows. Drew changes. The control sharpens. Military training did something to Drew. It fed the part of him that craved authority. It taught him discipline and command. It taught him that dominance was earned through obedience, and he expected that same obedience at home. Carol noticed the shift immediately. His letters were no longer sweet. They were demanding, critical, possessive. He wanted to know where she was, who she talked to, why she didn't respond fast enough, why she didn't answer, why she didn't prioritize him. Carol brushed it off as stress, as military pressure, as something he would outgrow. But Drew wasn't just becoming stronger. He was becoming more controlling, more entitled, more dangerous. When he came back home, the charm returned, but only temporarily. The control didn't disappear. It evolved. 3. Marriage. The transformation begins. Carol married Drew in 1974. The wedding photos show a young couple smiling, but Carol would later say those smiles didn't last long. Right after the wedding, she noticed. His temper was sharper. His tone was colder. His expectations were stricter. His moods were harder to predict. He wanted things his way. Always, immediately, without question. He didn't yell often, not yet. But he controlled with looks, with silence, with comments meant to dig into her self-worth. He didn't need to raise his voice. He controlled through his presence. Carol was young. She told herself this was normal, that she was overreacting, that he was stressed, that it would get better. But control doesn't shrink. It grows. 4. The badge changes everything. When Drew entered law enforcement, something shifted permanently. The badge didn't humble him. It empowered him. It gave him confidence, authority, a sense of superiority, the belief that his decisions were always right, the belief that his judgment mattered more than anyone else's. He wore the badge like armor, and he wore it at home too. Carol noticed a new dynamic. Drew the husband and Drew the officer were merging into one person. He started using phrases like, "Don't question me. I know what I'm doing. I'm the one in charge. You're overreacting. I handle things like this every day." Disagreements turned into lectures. Conflicts turned into interrogations. Emotional conversations turned into power struggles. Drew wasn't interested in partnership. He wanted dominance. 5. The subtle violence begins. The violence in the early years wasn't always physical. It was psychological. Drew learned how to undermine Carol's confidence, twist her words, isolate her from friends, control finances, monitor her movements, guilt her into compliance, make her believe she was the problem. If she cried, he called her dramatic. If she questioned him, he called her disrespectful. If she tried to set boundaries, he called her ungrateful. And when that didn't work, the rage emerged. Not every day, not every week, but often enough that Carol lived on eggshells. She never knew which version of Drew she was going to get. Drew the charmer, Drew the cop, Drew the interrogator, Drew the intimidator. One fight, ended with Drew shoving her. Another ended with him ripping something out of her hands. Another ended with him punching a wall, inches from her face. He knew exactly how close he could get without leaving marks. He knew how to weaponize fear without incriminating himself. He was practicing. 6. Carol sees the pattern, but nobody else does. Carol tried to talk to friends about Drew's behavior. The responses were predictable. He's just stressed. Cops can be intense. He loves you. He's trying to protect you. Marriage is hard. You're reading too much into it. People liked Drew. People trusted Drew. People saw him as a catch. Carol was young. She didn't have the language for what was happening. She didn't know what gaslighting was. She didn't understand coercive control. She didn't realize she was in a cycle that would later end in death for another woman. She just knew she felt trapped, lonely, confused, conflicted, afraid. The version of Drew that the world saw and the version she lived with were not the same man. But she didn't have proof. She didn't have witnesses. She only had her instincts. And those instincts were screaming, leave. 7. The escape. Carol walks away. Carol made a decision that would save her life. He dismissed her. He minimized her emotions. He acted like losing her meant nothing. He told her she was overreacting. He made her feel small, silly, and replaceable. But the truth was clear. Carol's escape wasn't rejection. It was survival. She had seen enough to know things would get worse. She had felt enough to know Drew's need for control was escalating. She had sensed enough to know he was never going to let anyone leave without consequences. She was right, because the next woman who left him wouldn't be as lucky. 8. Carol's warning, he's going to kill someone. Years later, when news broke about Kathleen Savio's death and Stacy Peterson's disappearance, reporters found Carol Brown and asked her what she thought. She didn't hesitate. I knew something like this would happen. She told interviewers Drew had a dark side. A side that no one wanted to see. A side that made her fear for her life. She told them, he's going to kill someone if he hasn't already. Her words weren't bitter. They weren't vindictive. They were prophetic. She had seen the early version of the monster the world would later witness. She survived him. But she never forgot him. To this day, she says she feels lucky. Lucky she got out before things escalated. Lucky she escaped before her story became another headline. 9. Why Carol's story matters. Carol's story matters because it shows the pattern began early. It proves Drew's controlling behavior wasn't sudden. It reveals the psychological seeds of abuse. It exposes the subtlety of coercive control. It demonstrates how society dismisses early signs. It foreshadows everything that comes later. Carol survived because she left early, but Drew learned something dangerous from her departure. Women could leave him, and he hated that. He vowed, consciously or not, never to let it happen again. And the next woman who entered his life, the woman who became wife number 2, would experience a darker, more emboldened version of Drew Peterson. Because predators evolve, patterns strengthen, and control becomes more urgent. Carol escaped the beginning. Vicki Connolly was about to walk straight into the storm. If Carol Brown was the first warning, then Vicki Connolly was the alarm siren the world chose to ignore. She didn't just experience Drew Peterson's need for control. She experienced the evolution of it. The escalation. The entitlement. The rage that was no longer subtle. The confidence that came from years behind a badge. The transformation from charming officer into a man who believed he could end a woman's life and walk away untouched. Vicki saw that transformation up close. And her story is the moment where Drew Peterson stopped being merely controlling and became something far more dangerous. 1. A new marriage, a new beginning, or so it seemed. Drew Peterson married wife number 2, Vicki Connolly, in 1982, not long after his divorce from Carol Brown. At first, Vicki was drawn to Drew for the same reasons so many others were. He was confident. He was social. He was charming. He made her feel secure. He presented himself as a man who could take care of things. This wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was deliberate, calculated. Drew chose women he knew he could mold, and Vicki, younger, bright, eager for a stable partner, became his next target. Their early days were calm, warm, affectionate, but like a mask slipping, Drew's true nature emerged in waves. 2. Cracks in the foundation. The control tightens. Vicki soon noticed things Carol had seen years earlier. Drew controlled her schedule. Drew questioned her constantly. Drew monitored her friendships. Drew made comments about how she dressed. Drew wanted access to her finances. Drew expected obedience, the kind a sergeant demands from subordinates. But Vicki also noticed something Carol hadn't faced. Drew's police badge had changed him even more. He had grown more confident, more entitled, more convinced of his superiority. He held power. He enforced order. He commanded respect. And in his mind, those same rules applied at home. Vicki would later say, when he came home, he didn't stop being a cop. He brought that authority into the house. He didn't speak to her like a partner. He spoke to her like someone beneath him. 3. The infidelity, the secrets, and the double life. Drew Peterson wasn't just controlling. He was unfaithful. And Vicki discovered this quickly. She caught him, lying about late shifts, flirting with women, meeting women behind her back, engaging in affairs with multiple partners, using his job as an excuse for disappearing at night. Drew didn't deny the affairs. He didn't apologize. He justified them. He blamed Vicki. He called her jealous, paranoid, emotional. He told her she was lucky to have him. He insisted she was overreacting. This is a classic narcissistic pattern. Create chaos, deny the damage, gaslight the victim, demand loyalty. Vicki began to realize she was living with someone who twisted reality to suit his needs. But she had no idea just how dangerous that reality would become. 4. The violence emerges. The quiet threat turns physical. The emotional abuse escalated into physical intimidation. The first time Drew shoved her, Vicki told herself it was a mistake. Stress, pressure, a moment of anger. But the incidents didn't stay minor. The shoves became grabs. The grabs became slaps. The slaps became something worse, a silent threat, because Drew didn't need to beat Vicki brutally. He needed only to send a message. I can hurt you, and no one will stop me. He made sure she understood the hierarchy. He was the authority. He was the protector. He was the punisher. He was the judge of what was acceptable. In one chilling moment, Vicki recalled, he grabbed me by the throat and pinned me to the wall. He didn't choke me, but he didn't have to. It was psychological torture, a demonstration that he was in control, that she belonged to him, that she could not stand up to him. But the worst was yet to come, Because Drew Peterson wasn't just a violent husband. He was a cop who knew exactly how to hide the violence. He knew how to leave no marks. He knew what police looked for. He knew how prosecutors thought. He knew how victims behaved. He knew how to manipulate witnesses, and he used that knowledge to refine his abuse. 5. The police officer who used his badge as a weapon. Vicki later described how Drew used law enforcement to control her. He would remind her that no one would believe her, tell her he had friends in the department, claim he could make her disappear, threaten that if she reported him, she would be arrested, take her phone, monitor her movements, follow her in his police car. This wasn't normal jealousy. This was institutional abuse. A cop using the justice system as a cage. A badge becoming a leash. A uniform becoming a psychological weapon. And then came the moment that defined everything for Vicki. The moment she realized she was living with a man who believed he was above the law. 6. The threat that foreshadowed a murder. One night, during an argument that escalated out of control, Drew leaned close to Vicki and said calmly, "I could kill you and make it look like an accident." He said it with no fear, no hesitation, no emotion, just certainty. The certainty of a man who believed he was untouchable. The certainty of a man who believed the world would take his side. The certainty of a man who believed he could get away with murder. And as we'll later see, he was right, at least for a long time. When Vicki heard those words, something inside her shifted. The fear became real. The threat became tangible. The possibility of death became a daily worry. She realized she wasn't in a marriage. She was in captivity. She later told interviewers, "He wanted me scared. He wanted me obedient. And he wanted me to know he could end me." She knew she had to get out. But leaving Drew Peterson was not easy. Predators don't let their victims go willingly. And Drew was no exception. 7. The attempt to leave, a dangerous escape. When Vicki first tried to separate from Drew, he reacted with anger, threats, accusations, manipulation, promises, intimidation. He followed her, called her repeatedly, left messages, showed up at her workplace, demanded she come home. He alternated between, "I love you, come back," and "If you try to leave, I'll ruin your life." This is the classic cycle of abusive control. Threat, apology, manipulation, threat, apology, repeat. But Vicki was stronger than he realized. She made her exit plan carefully. She saved money secretly. She hid important documents. She told almost no one what she was planning. And when she finally left, she didn't look back. She walked away from the house, the marriage, and the man who had turned her world into a prison. Yet even after leaving him, Vicki lived in fear. Fear that Drew would show up. Fear that he would retaliate. Fear that he would follow through on his threat. Fear that he would kill her. But she escaped, and that decision saved her life. Because the next woman who left Drew, the woman who became wife number 3, didn't escape. 8. Vicki's warning to the world. After Kathleen Savio's suspicious death in 2004, reporters sought out Drew's former wives. Vicki didn't hesitate. She didn't hide. She didn't soften her words. She didn't protect his image. She told the world the truth. He is capable of murder. He told me he could kill me and make it look like an accident. People were stunned. Reporters were stunned. Police officers were stunned. Even prosecutors initially didn't know what to make of it. But Vicki wasn't exaggerating. She wasn't dramatic. She wasn't bitter. She was telling them exactly what she had lived through. and what Kathleen Savio would later die from. Vicki said publicly, "Drew always thought he was smarter than everyone else. He always thought he could get away with anything." Her words weren't taken seriously enough. Because at the time, the world still saw Drew Peterson as the charming cop, the funny interview guest, the guy who flirted on camera, the man who joked during press conferences. But behind that smile, behind the jokes, behind the swagger, was the truth Vicki had tried to show the world. Drew Peterson was a ticking time bomb, capable of murder, confident he could hide it, and determined to keep control at any cost. 9. The foreshadowing no one recognized. Looking back, Vicki Connolly's warnings were not subtle. She said, he was controlling, he was violent, he was manipulative. He used his police training against her. He believed he could kill and get away with it. He treated women as property. He became dangerous when challenged. She described the exact behavior that would later lead to Kathleen's death, Stacy's disappearance, Drew's eventual downfall. But nobody stopped him. Nobody intervened. Nobody connected the dots. And that failure, by police, by the courts, by society, would set the stage for tragedy. Because the next woman to fall into Drew Peterson's orbit would not survive her marriage. She saw the danger. She reported it. She warned people. She begged for help. But by the time anyone listened, she was already dead. Every case has a moment where the truth tries to break through, where the mask cracks, where the lies start to unravel, where the abuser loses control for the first time. For Drew Peterson, that moment was Kathleen Savio, the third woman to marry him, the second woman to fear him, the first woman to die. Her story is not just a chapter in the Drew Peterson saga. It is the chapter that should have stopped everything. It is the chapter that should have saved Stacy Peterson's life. It is the chapter that exposes every failure, from law enforcement to the courts to the justice system Drew manipulated for decades. Kathleen was crying for help until the day she died. And even after death, she was still trying to speak. But in 2004, nobody listened. Not until it was too late. 1. The woman who challenged Drew Peterson before Kathleen Savio became a victim. She was a fighter. Independent, strong-willed, sharp, practical. She didn't fall for Drew's charm the way others did. She saw through him, not at first, but slowly. Piece by piece, like peeling back layers of a facade. Drew loved that she was fiery. He loved that she challenged him. He loved that she was intelligent. But most of all, he loved the chase. Predators often do. Because the women who challenge them are the women they need to conquer. Drew pursued Kathleen aggressively, flirtatiously, persistently, relentlessly. She pushed back. He persisted. And like so many before her, she fell for the version of him that was charming, confident, stable, ambitious. The illusion. By the time she realized what he really was, it was already too late. 2. Marriage. The illusion breaks quickly. Drew married Kathleen in 1992. At first, their marriage looked happy, but it didn't take long for Kathleen to notice. His temper, his controlling nature, his need for dominance, his manipulation, his jealousy, his infidelity, his unpredictability. She once told a friend, "He can be the nicest person you've ever met and the meanest person you'll ever know. It depends on what he wants from you." Drew continued his pattern: charm, control, domination, collapse. But with Kathleen, he escalated faster. Because Kathleen didn't submit. She challenged him, argued back, asserted herself, pushed boundaries. And Drew saw this as a threat to his authority. The marriage turned volatile, explosive, dangerous. Neighbors later said, "We heard screaming. We heard crashing. We heard fear." And they heard it, often. But Drew Peterson was a police sergeant. Who would dare intervene? 3. The abuse becomes visible. Unlike Drew's first 2 wives, Kathleen documented everything. She filed 18 police reports. Let that number sink in. 18 separate reports. Reports that included threats, physical altercations, stalking, intimidation, property damage, break-ins, harassment, threats against her life. She told friends, "He won't stop until I'm dead." She wrote in legal documents, "He will kill me." She confided in her sister, "He's going to make it look like an accident." These statements would later become haunting echoes of her final moments. But at the time, they were ignored, dismissed, overlooked, buried under the blue wall. Buried under the blue wall that protected Drew Peterson. Sergeant, a man seen as helpful, charming, loyal, funny. Kathleen's warnings were treated as exaggeration, or bitterness, or marital dysfunction. Anything but what they really were. Cries for help from a woman who knew she was in mortal danger. 4. The divorce, a war zone. In 2002, after 10 years of marriage, Kathleen finally filed for divorce. But divorcing Drew Peterson was not like divorcing a normal husband. It was like going to war. He harassed her, stalked her, broke into her house, drained their finances, manipulated court proceedings, ignored boundaries, threatened her, used the divorce as a stage to display dominance. Kathleen went from fearful to terrified. She told relatives, "If something happens to me, if I die, Drew did it." Her pastor recalled, she was exhausted. She felt hunted. Even her divorce attorney said she was living in fear of Drew Peterson. And she had every reason to be. Because while Kathleen fought for her freedom, Drew had already found his next target. 5. The stage is set. Enter Stacy Ann Peterson. While still married to Kathleen, Drew met a 17-year-old girl working at a hotel. Stacy Ann Peterson, he was 47. She was still in high school. But that age gap wasn't a flaw in his eyes. It was the point. A young girl could be molded, controlled, shaped, manipulated, isolated. Everything Kathleen wasn't. Friends and family were shocked. Kathleen was devastated. She told people, "He left me for a child." This wasn't just infidelity. It was a psychological demolition. Drew flaunted Stacy, showed her off. Displayed her like a trophy. Used her to intimidate Kathleen. During their divorce, Kathleen told loved ones, "This isn't going to end well. I feel it." She was right. Because the arrival of Stacy didn't distract Drew from Kathleen. It accelerated the danger. 6. March 1st, 2004, the night Kathleen died. On the night of March 1st, 2004, Kathleen Savio was found dead in her home. The scene. She was lying in a bathtub. The tub was dry. Her hair was damp. Her skin was bruised. There were abrasions on her body. Blood was present. The position of her body made no logical sense. She was half-dressed. But the most shocking detail, she was found in a dry bathtub. Drew had an airtight alibi. He was on duty. Police arrived. They took one look, And within moments, they ruled her death an accidental drowning. It made no sense. None. But they didn't question it, because the suspect was a police sergeant. Peer. A brother. A man they trusted. A man they admired. A man they never imagined could kill. The investigation was sloppy. No forensic analysis. No fingerprints. No timeline established. No fingerprints preservation. No autopsy testing beyond the basics. No interviews with neighbors. No questioning of Drew. No follow-up on Kathleen's 18 police reports. No consideration of her repeated statements that Drew would kill her. Nothing. 7. The autopsy. A medical mystery. A first autopsy claimed accidental drowning. But drowning requires water. The bathtub was dry. Medical experts were baffled. Kathleen's brother said, "She didn't drown. It's impossible." Everyone knew something was wrong. Her sister cried. She told us he would kill her. And now she's dead. But the police insisted. No foul play. Case closed. Filed away. Stamped. Buried. Drew immediately moved on with his life. Married Stacy. Took custody of his children with Kathleen. And kept wearing his badge. Kathleen became a statistic. But the truth was still waiting. Waiting for the day Stacy would vanish. Waiting for the day the case would reopen. Waiting for someone to finally listen. 8. The truth reopens. Stacy's disappearance changes everything. In 2007, when Stacy Peterson disappeared, the world suddenly turned its eyes toward Drew Peterson. Reporters dug through his past. Investigators reviewed old records. Authorities began questioning everything, and they reached Kathleen's file. The file that contained 18 police reports, domestic violence claims, fear for her life, threats of murder, and a bathtub death that made no sense. For the first time, someone asked, "How does a woman drown in a dry bathtub?" Investigators demanded a second autopsy. Kathleen Savio's body was exhumed, and the truth finally emerged. 9. The second autopsy. Homicide confirmed. The findings were unmistakable. Blunt force trauma. Bruising inconsistent with an accident. Abrasions indicating a struggle. No water presence. Position inconsistent with slipping. Defensive wounds. Signs of being held down. Signs of being staged. The medical examiner said, "This was not accidental. This was a homicide." Everything Kathleen said before her death was suddenly validated. Her warnings, her police reports, her pleas, her fear, her prediction that he would kill her. They were all true. And the system had failed her. It failed her children. It failed her family. It failed the community. It failed Stacy. It failed everyone. But the truth wasn't just clear. It was horrifying. Because if authorities had believed Kathleen, Stacy would still be alive. 10. The world reacts. Shock, anger, outrage. When the truth came out, the public was stunned. How could a decorated officer murder his wife and have it ruled an accident? How could 18 police reports be ignored? How could warnings from multiple wives be brushed aside? How could a woman drown in a dry tub and nobody question it? The answer was simple. Because Drew Peterson was one of them. A fellow officer. A good old boy. The charming cop everyone liked. A man protected by decades of institutional blind loyalty. 11. The pattern becomes deadly clear. Looking back, every warning sign was there. Every red flag waved. Loudly, every victim spoke. Every friend noticed. Every neighbor saw. Every report documented danger. And every failure of the system allowed Drew Peterson to evolve from a controlling husband to an abuser, to a predator, to a murderer, and eventually to a man who believed he could make someone vanish. Kathleen's death was not the first time he had threatened a wife. It was not the first time he had harmed a woman. But it was the first time the threat became real. And it was only the beginning, because 3 years later, Drew Peterson's fourth wife would disappear, and the world would finally wake up. Some stories end with a body. Some end with a confession. Some end with a crime scene. But the disappearance of Stacy Ann Peterson doesn't end at all. It lingers. It haunts. It questions. It screams silently across years of unanswered prayers and empty chairs. Because Stacy wasn't just another wife. She was the woman who finally pulled the curtain back on Drew Peterson. Not because she wanted to, but because she vanished. And her disappearance forced the world to finally see him for who he really was. But before Stacy became a missing woman, before she became the reason Kathleen's body was exhumed, before she became a household name, she was a teenage girl who met a much older man. A man who saw her not as a partner, but as property. A man who didn't fall in love with her. He claimed her. This is her story. 1. A child meets a man twice her age. When Stacy Ann Cales met Drew Peterson, she was 17 years old. Still in high school. Still figuring out life. Still a kid. Drew was 47. A police sergeant. A veteran officer. A father. A husband, still married to Kathleen at the time. Drew wasn't just older. He was a figure of authority. He was a man with power. He was someone who could shape Stacy's world, and he knew it. They met at a hotel where Stacy worked, part-time as a desk clerk. Drew noticed her immediately. And Stacy, young, sweet, insecure, trying to find her place, noticed him. He was confident, flirtatious, charming. He made her feel seen, in a way teenage girls often mistake for love. But what looked like romance was grooming. What looked like attention was targeting. What looked like affection was targeting. That was manipulation. Drew didn't want a partner. He wanted control, and a teenager was the perfect candidate. 2. The power imbalance that changed everything. When a teenager dates someone 30 years older, the relationship is never balanced. The older partner has more power, more money, more life experience, more emotional control, more influence, more dominance. And Drew used all of that. He knew exactly how to mold Stacy. He complimented her constantly. He made her feel special. He offered stability. He isolated her from friends. He inserted himself into her life. He made her dependent on him emotionally and financially. He became the sun around which her world revolved. People around her saw red flags. Her family expressed concern. Friends felt uncomfortable. Coworkers questioned the relationship. Even neighbors sensed something off. But Drew brushed it off. It's true. Love. She's mature for her age. Mind your own business. And because he was a police officer, decorated, respected, admired, people hesitated to question him. 3. The transition from Kathleen to Stacy. While Drew was dating Stacy, he was still married to Kathleen. He visited Stacy at night. He fought with Kathleen during the day. The overlap was intentional. It gave him leverage. It made Kathleen feel replaced. It made Stacy feel chosen. But Kathleen wasn't just devastated. She was terrified. She told people, "He left me for a child, and he's going to kill me." 2 years later, Kathleen was dead. And within months, Drew married Stacy. Kathleen's blood wasn't even dry in the ground. He moved into a new life overnight, with a new wife who was 30 years younger, and completely under his control. To Drew, Stacy wasn't a partner. She was a fresh start. A clean slate. A man who promised to love her. But as soon as she married Drew, he controlled every corner of her world. The charming cop was gone. What remained was the controlling predator beneath the surface. 5. The psychological breakdown of a young wife. Stacy began to change. Family members noticed. She looked exhausted. She seemed nervous. She spoke less. She cried more. She was scared. She avoided eye contact. She lost weight. She started confiding small pieces of the truth. Her sister Cassandra later said, "She was fading away. She was disappearing emotionally, long before she disappeared physically." Stacy tried to stand up for herself, but every time she pushed back, Drew doubled his control. Arguments escalated. Threats surfaced. Drew reminded her, "I'm the police. No one will believe you." It wasn't a bluff. It was a fact. Stacy believed him, because she had seen what happened to Kathleen. 6. Stacy learns the truth. Drew killed Kathleen. One of the most chilling turning points in this entire case was the moment Stacy uncovered a secret Drew never meant to reveal. A secret that changed everything. A secret that sealed her fate. Stacy confided in multiple family members, her pastor, and close friends. Drew killed Kathleen. She told them Drew admitted it. Not by choice, but in a moment of rage. It slipped out. Or he wanted her to know. Or he wanted her fear. Or he needed dominance. But Stacy knew. Kathleen didn't drown. Kathleen didn't fall. Kathleen didn't die by accident. And this revelation terrified her. Because Stacy realized, if Drew could kill one wife, he could kill another. And this time, he wouldn't leave the body behind. So Stacy started making plans to leave. She saved money. She talked to a divorce attorney. She began confiding in her sister Cassandra. Almost daily. She wanted out, and Drew sensed it. 7. The final days. Stacy prepares to leave. In October 2007, Stacy told friends and family, "I'm leaving him. I can't do this anymore." She spoke to a pastor. He later testified. "She told me Drew killed his previous wife." She knew the truth, and she feared for her life. That same week, Stacy told her sister, "If something happens to me, if I disappear, it was Drew. Not might, not maybe, was." She saw the danger as clearly as Kathleen had. But just like Kathleen, her warnings were not enough to stop what came next. 8. October 28th, 2007. The day Stacy disappeared. On the morning of October 28th, 2007, Stacy vanished. She didn't pick up her children. She didn't attend planned events. She didn't call her family. She didn't show up anywhere. Her phone went silent. Her presence evaporated. Drew told a ridiculous story. She ran away with another man. Stacy's loved ones immediately responded. She would never leave her kids. Not for one night. Not for 1 hour. Not for 1 second. She loved them. She protected them. She worshipped them. The idea she would abandon them made no sense. Unless the person telling the story wanted to hide something. 9. The behavior that gave him away. Drew's behavior following Stacy's disappearance was chilling. He didn't grieve. He didn't panic. He didn't cry. He joked. He flirted. He made sarcastic remarks to reporters. He smirked. He complained he couldn't find a girlfriend. He made TV appearances. He laughed during interviews. His demeanor was not that of a concerned husband. It was the demeanor of a narcissist who believed the world revolved around him. The public watched in disbelief. This wasn't a grieving spouse. This was a man performing. And his performance was horrifying. 10. The confession that almost solved the case. One of the most important figures in Stacy's disappearance was Drew's own stepbrother, Thomas Morphy. Morphy claimed that on the day Stacy vanished, Drew asked him to help carry a large, warm blue container out of the house. It felt heavy, too heavy. They loaded it into Drew's SUV. Morphy feared he had helped dispose of a body. He was so distraught, he attempted suicide the next day. He survived. And he told investigators the truth. "I believe I helped him move Stacy's body." This wasn't gossip. It wasn't speculation. It was a confession from the one person Drew trusted enough to help him finish the crime. And it changed everything. 11. The search for Stacy. Lakes, woods, quarries. Search teams combed through quarries, retention ponds, forests, farmlands, abandoned properties, industrial sites, drainage pits, waterways, drones, dogs, underwater divers, infrared scans, cadaver dogs, everywhere. And still, no Stacy. Drew had decades of law enforcement experience. He knew where bodies were found. He knew how evidence decayed. He knew what police looked for. He knew exactly how to hide a body. And whatever he did with Stacy, he did perfectly. 12. Stacy's disappearance exposes the truth. If Stacy hadn't disappeared, Kathleen's death would still be labeled accidental. Drew would still be free. The truth would still be buried. The warnings would still be ignored. Stacy's disappearance didn't just reveal his crimes. It exposed the failure of police, the failure of the justice system, the failure to protect Kathleen, the failure to believe women. Her disappearance forced an entire nation to reopen the first death, to ask the questions they should have asked in 2004, to see Drew Peterson not as a cop, but as a killer hiding in uniform. Her disappearance became the turning point in the case. But tragically, Stacy never came home, and her body has never been found. 13. The aftermath. Stacy becomes America's ghost. Stacy became a symbol of domestic violence, coercive control, law enforcement corruption, power imbalances, the consequences of ignoring victims, the lives lost to narcissistic predators. Her disappearance shattered illusions, destroyed Drew's carefully curated image, exposed decades of abuses he had hidden behind his badge. But to her family, Stacy is still missing. A daughter, a mother, and young woman who deserved a long, full life. A woman who told the truth and paid with her life. When Stacy Peterson vanished, the world finally looked to Drew Peterson with suspicion. But suspicion wasn't enough to convict a man who had spent 3 decades learning how to hide his crimes. A man trained to control scenes. A man who understood evidence better than any investigator. A man who knew exactly how long it took for witnesses to crack, for memories to fade, for bodies to decay. Stacy's disappearance didn't just spark fear. It ignited an investigation that would peel back every lie, every threat, every warning that had been ignored for years. This was the moment Drew lost control, not because he made a mistake, but because his pattern finally collided with reality. This is where the walls start closing in. 1. The call that changed everything. On October 29, 2007, the day after Stacy was last seen, her sister, Cassandra Cales, reported her missing. She didn't wait. She didn't hesitate. Cassandra knew her sister, knew her habits, knew her routines, knew she would never abandon her children. When Cassandra made that call, she said 4 words that would define the entire investigation. He did something to her. No one had evidence. No one had motive. No one had a body. But everyone had a feeling. And feelings were enough to get the ball rolling. 2. Police arrive at the Peterson home. When police arrived at the Peterson home, Drew was calm. Too calm. He didn't pace, didn't cry, didn't ask questions, didn't express concern. Instead, he said, "She ran off with another man." The line was rehearsed, delivered with ease, as if he had practiced it all night. Detectives noticed. No panic, no urgency, no confusion, no grief, no emotion, no genuine fear for her safety. Instead, they saw confidence, arrogance, a man who seemed annoyed by the interruption. One investigator later said, "It was like he expected us, like he knew exactly what we would ask." Of course he did. He had been on the other side of investigations for 30 years. He knew the drill, and he knew how to play the game. 3. Drew's story falls apart immediately. Drew's version of events changed constantly. In the first 72 hours, he gave 4 different accounts, inconsistent timelines, contradictory statements, details that made no sense. He claimed Stacy ran away, was depressed, wanted space, left with another man, abandoned her kids. But when investigators pressed for details, the cracks showed. Lie number 1. She called me to tell me she was leaving. Phone records showed no such call. Lie number 2. She packed some clothes before leaving. All her belongings were still in the house. Lie number 3. She left willingly. No one Stacy loved believed it. Lie number 4. She'll come back. She never did. Drew wasn't defending his wife, he was defending himself. And detectives felt it instantly. 4. The car, the phone, the timeline. As detectives reconstructed the timeline of Stacy's disappearance, they discovered Drew lied about when he last saw her. His story shifted by the hour. Stacy's car was found at home, untouched. She didn't drive away. Someone placed the car there deliberately. Her phone vanished. No pings, no activity, no trace. Drew, a trained police sergeant, knew how phones worked. He knew how to destroy or hide them. His stepbrother attempted suicide the next day. A glaring red flag that would later blow the case open. Drew's demeanor was off. Cold, detached, almost theatrical. Investigators didn't have a body, but they had a feeling. And it was enough to dig deeper. 5. The media storm begins. When news broke that a young mother, married to a police officer, had vanished, the media descended. Reporters flooded Bolingbrook. Neighbors talked. Old stories resurfaced. Friends came forward. Women Drew had dated began reaching out. And suddenly, the story wasn't about a missing woman. It was about a police sergeant with a violent past and a wife who predicted her own death. Kathleen's name surfaced again. Whispers spread. What about the first dead wife? The one who drowned in a dry bathtub. The one whose warnings were ignored. The one who told everyone she would be murdered. Reporters asked, is this connected? Is this a pattern? Is Drew Peterson a killer? And for the first time, the world was ready to listen. 6. Drew goes on national TV and destroys himself. Instead of staying quiet, Drew Peterson did the one thing innocent people rarely do. He went on national television. Not once, not twice, but repeatedly. On morning shows, evening news, talk shows, radio programs. He flirted. He joked. He smirked. He mocked the investigation. He called Stacy a runaway. He rolled his eyes at interviewers. The arrogance was overwhelming. During a memorable interview with Matt Lauer, Lauer asked, "Did you kill Stacy Peterson?" Drew didn't deny it immediately. He didn't show emotion. No, he didn't look offended. He smirked and shrugged. No, just no. No outrage, no shock, no pain. Just a cold, emotionless denial. The public saw through him instantly. He wasn't grieving. He was performing. And the performance revealed who he really was. 7. Meanwhile, investigators question everyone. Detectives began interviewing friends, neighbors, co-workers, family, previous wives, former girlfriends, Drew's stepbrother, and what they learned was chilling. Control, jealousy, violence, manipulation, threats. A pattern so clear it became undeniable. Multiple people said Drew threatened to kill them. Some exact quotes. "I'll make it look like an accident. No one will believe you. I'm the police. I know how to hide things." Stacy confided that Drew killed Kathleen. To her pastor. To her sister. To her friends. She told them Drew confessed. She told them she feared she was next. "I told them if she vanished, he did it." People heard screams the weekend Stacy vanished. Neighbors reported yelling, banging, and a woman's voice crying. Drew's children described arguing, control, and fear. Consistent, emotional testimony. All of this began building the case not just for Stacy, but for Kathleen. Detectives reopened the Kathleen Savio case. With Stacy missing, investigators made a critical decision. Reopen the death investigation of Kathleen Savio. The original autopsy was suspicious. The scene made no sense. The injuries didn't match a fall. The bathtub was dry. Her hair was damp. Her body was staged. Kathleen had predicted her death. She had filed 18 police reports. She told dozens of people she feared Drew would kill her. The pieces were staring everyone in the face. So Kathleen's body was exhumed. New forensic experts were brought in. And what they discovered changed the case forever. 9. The second autopsy. A bombshell. The independent forensic pathologist concluded Kathleen Savio was murdered. Not drowned. Not injured accidentally. Not a fall. Murdered. The injuries included multiple deep bruises, abrasions consistent with a struggle, a 1-inch head wound inconsistent with slipping, defensive marks, signs of being held down, signs of staging. The experts stated, "This is a homicide. No question." Kathleen's family wept. Investigators felt vindicated. Reporters exploded the story nationwide. Drew Peterson had not one dead wife, but 2, and 1 was missing. The investigation was now a homicide case. 10. The stepbrother confession, the missing piece. The most critical moment came from Thomas Morphy, Drew's stepbrother. he confessed, "I helped Drew carry a large blue container out of the house. It was warm. I believe her body was in it." He said Drew told him, "You know what you're doing, right?" Morphy cracked under the guilt and attempted suicide the next day. He survived and told investigators the truth. This was the missing link, the story police always needed, the witness who tied Drew to the disposal, the testimony that proved Stacy didn't leave voluntarily. Drew had killed her, and Morphy helped him unknowingly. 11. Surveillance teams watched Drew 24/7. Police placed Drew under physical surveillance, wire surveillance, telephone taps, undercover monitoring. He knew it. He mocked them. He waved at them. He called them my paparazzi. He brought them donuts. He bragged that they had nothing on him. But for the first time in his life, Drew Peterson was no longer in control. 12. Undercover agents record. One undercover officer befriended Drew. They ate together. They talked privately. What Drew didn't know, every word was being recorded. Some quotes captured on tape. "I'm untouchable. Stacy's not coming back. I did nothing wrong. I'm smarter than them. They'll never find her." The arrogance was astonishing. But the evidence was stacking. Page 13. The investigation hits a wall. No body, no case. Despite overwhelming circumstantial evidence, one thing was missing: Stacy's body. Without a body, no cause of death, no physical proof, no forensic evidence, no DNA, no confirmation of murder. Drew knew this. He relied on it. He built his defense around it. He told reporters, no body, no crime. And legally, he wasn't wrong. Investigators were stuck. But Stacy's disappearance had already achieved something extraordinary. It reopened Kathleen's case, and that case was prosecutable. And that is where investigators shifted their focus. They would put Drew in prison, not for Stacy, but for Kathleen. 14. The tipping point. The case gains momentum. By late 2008, the case against Drew had grown massive. 18 domestic violence reports, the death of Kathleen, the disappearance of Stacy, witness statements, stepbrother testimony, psychological profiles, autopsy revisions, financial motives, inconsistent alibis, recorded conversations. The investigation reached a point of pressure where something had to break. And soon, Drew did. Not by confessing, not by slipping up, but by doing something so arrogant, so reckless, it would seal his fate. He tried to hire a hitman. Every criminal has a moment when the lies stop working, when the charm wears off, when the mask falls, when the predator becomes the prey. For Drew Peterson, that moment didn't come from guilt. It didn't come from fear. It didn't come from Stacy's disappearance, or Kathleen's murder, or the mountain of evidence stacking against him. It came from something simpler: control. The one thing he valued most was slipping out of his hands. His reputation collapsed. His finances collapsed. His public image collapsed. His family fell apart. His children slipped away. The press turned on him. His confidence turned into desperation. And desperation drives men like Drew to do reckless things. This is the chapter where Drew Peterson, for the first time in his life, stopped being untouchable and started being hunted. 1. The fall of a golden boy cop. Before Stacy vanished, Drew Peterson lived comfortably, financially secure. Nice home, pension, stable salary, police benefits, side businesses, a house full of children he controlled, a wife he manipulated, a community that respected him. But once Stacy disappeared, everything began to collapse. Drew resigned from the police force. It wasn't voluntary. Pressure, from the community forced him out. He left with a pension, but the damage was done. Lawsuits drained his resources. Kathleen's family filed wrongful death actions. Legal fees piled up. His house nearly went into foreclosure. He could no longer work as a cop. The only world he understood, the only world where he held power, was gone. Public perception turned against him. Neighbors avoided him. Parents kept their children away. Friends stopped calling. Former co-workers distanced themselves. The facade he built for decades came crumbling down. And Drew Peterson, for the first time, felt powerless. 2. Media attention turns into a circus. Instead of laying low, Drew took the opposite approach. He fed the media. He flirted on TV. He gave sarcastic interviews. He posed for cameras. He mocked reporters. He joked about Stacy. At one point, he even said, "Maybe Stacy will call in and tell you she's okay." He turned tragedy into entertainment. He turned suspicion into performance art. He treated his wife's disappearance like a publicity stunt. But the arrogance backfired. The more Drew talked, the more guilty he looked. The more he joked, the angrier the public became. The more he smirked, the more investigators dug. He was no longer a respected sergeant. He was a punchline. A villain. A villain, a narcissist unraveling on live TV. And a public reaction fueled something dangerous inside Drew. Desperation. 3. Drew loses control of his kids. Behind closed doors, Drew's home was falling apart. His older children, especially those from his marriage with Kathleen, were traumatized. They saw the tension. They heard the arguments. They lived with the fear. After Stacy disappeared, Drew tightened his control over the children even more. He monitored their conversations. He isolated them from extended family. He used them to defend him publicly. He tried to rewrite the narrative. But children see through lies more clearly than adults. They felt the truth. They saw the panic. They watched the news. They heard whispers at school. They felt the house darken. Charles, Kathleen's eldest son, was especially vocal. He told relatives, "I know he did." It was a devastating revelation. The children were beginning to turn against him. And Drew could not handle losing control of his own household. His desperation intensified. 4. The finances collapse. Drew spirals. As the investigation expanded, Drew's life shrank. His income shrank. His savings shrank. His public image shattered. His reputation imploded. He tried to sell his house. No one would touch it. The Peterson house became a local curse. He tried to work private security. Companies refused to hire him. He tried to live normally. The world refused to let him. And so Drew became something he had never been before. Cornered. And cornered predators are dangerous. 5. The jailhouse rockstar persona. After Stacy vanished and the investigation reopened Kathleen's case, Drew began acting like a man starring in his own twisted reality show. He flirted with female journalists. He joked with paparazzi. He made sarcastic remarks about Stacy being on a beach somewhere. He called news cameras my fan club. He signed autographs. He posed with neighbors. He referred to the media as my groupies. It was psychopathic, detached, bizarre. It wasn't the behavior of a grieving husband. It was the behavior of a narcissist reveling in attention. But while Drew performed for the cameras, detectives were quietly closing in. 6. Undercover operation. Drew slips up. In 2008, investigators launched a covert operation. They sent an undercover officer, young, likable, friendly, to befriend Drew. This undercover cop helped him shop, ate meals with him, drove with him, listened to him complain, listened to him brag, became a new buddy Drew trusted. Meanwhile, every conversation was recorded. And Drew didn't disappoint. He said things like, "The cops have nothing on me. Stacy isn't coming back. I know how to get away with stuff." He mocked investigators. They're wasting their time. But then Drew made the mistake that would finally destroy him. He tried to hire him as a hitman. 7. The murder for hire plot. The turning point. In 2009, Drew learned that the prosecutor in Kathleen's case, State's Attorney James Glasgow, was building a homicide case strong enough to arrest him. And Drew, who had always relied on intimidation, decided to eliminate the problem. He asked the undercover officer, "Can you help me take care of someone?" The officer pretended not to understand. Drew clarified, "Glasgow, I want him gone." The hitman plot was underway. He gave details: money, timing, alibi, method. It was shocking, not because Drew plotted murder. He believed he was outsmarting detectives. He had no idea the entire conversation was being recorded. That plot alone could have put him in prison for decades. But investigators waited because they wanted the bigger case. Kathleen's murder. 8. The big picture comes together. By 2009, the investigation produced evidence of Kathleen's homicide, autopsy results, injury analysis, forensic findings, re-examination of crime scene, expert testimony, evidence of Stacy's disappearance, timeline inconsistencies, contradictory statements, stepbrother testimony, behavior following disappearance, phone records, evidence of Drew's pattern behavior, reports from ex-wives, police documentation, history of control, history of threats, evidence of obstruction and manipulation, lies to investigators, jokes about the case, media manipulation, public intimidation, the murder for hire plot, undercover recording, witness testimony, intent to kill prosecutors. This was enough. More than enough. The case was ready. The arrest was coming, and Drew didn't see it coming. May 7th, 2009. The arrest of Drew Peterson. On the morning of May 7th, 2009, police surrounded Drew's home. Officers approached cautiously. They knew Drew was trained and could be volatile. Drew stepped outside, calm but confused. They handcuffed him. He smirked. He looked at the cameras. He looked almost entertained. And then the charges were announced. First-degree murder for the death of Kathleen Savio. The moment Kathleen deserved. The moment Stacy deserved. The moment his ex-wives warned of. The moment the world waited for. Reporters asked, "Where's Stacy?" He shrugged, smirked, and said, "You'll never find her." His arrogance was a final confession. 10. The aftermath. Drew sits in jail. In jail, Drew was not quiet. He joked with inmates, flirted with female guards, called himself a ladies' man, treated the charges like an inconvenience, claimed the world misunderstood him, gave phone interviews, mocked prosecutors, bragged about his intelligence. But behind the jokes, his world was shrinking. No more badge. No more women. No more control. No more power. No more untouchability. For a man who lived on dominance, prison was psychological torture. And the trial that awaited him would be the final nail in his coffin. Every criminal case has a turning point. A moment when darkness finally meets daylight. A moment when victims' voices rise after years of being ignored. For the Drew Peterson story, that moment happens in a courtroom. A courtroom that would become a battlefield. A courtroom that would expose years of manipulation. A courtroom that would represent the failure and eventual triumph of the justice system. This trial was not ordinary. It wasn't just about evidence. It wasn't just about a death. It wasn't just about a missing woman. It wasn't even just about Kathleen. This was a trial about patterns, intent, control, coercive behavior, psychological domination, and a question that haunted the jury. If Drew Peterson killed one wife, is it possible he killed two? This is the story of the trial that shattered the illusion of his invincibility. 1. The Hearsay Revolution, a trial born from silence. Before the trial even began, the case sparked a legal war. The biggest issue prosecutors faced was simple. Kathleen was dead. Stacy was missing. And the most damning evidence, their warnings, their words, their fears, were technically hearsay. Under ordinary law, hearsay is not allowed. It cannot be admitted in court. But this case was not ordinary. Kathleen told friends, family, co-workers, neighbors, and police, "Drew is going to kill me." And Stacy told her pastor, sister, and close friends, "Drew killed Kathleen." These were not rumors. These were predictions. Predictions so accurate, they became confessions from the grave. Prosecutors argued. Kathleen knew she would be killed. Her words were evidence of intent. Stacy knew Drew murdered Kathleen. Stacy disappeared because she knew too much. Their voices should not be silenced just because Drew eliminated them. Judge after judge debated the law. Defense attorneys fought back. This opens the door to unreliable accusations. It violates Peterson's rights. These women can't be cross-examined. This is emotional manipulation. But the prosecutors argued something powerful. The only reason these women aren't here is because the defendant silenced them. The court agreed, and a new rule emerged. Hearsay that reveals a defendant's intent, threat, or plan can be admitted if the court believes the defendant made the witness unavailable. It became known across the country as the Drew Peterson rule. Once that ruling passed, the trial became a massacre for the defense. Because now, Kathleen could speak. Stacy could speak. Their warnings could be heard. Their fears became evidence. And Drew Peterson no longer had the power to silence them. 2. Opening statements. The tone is set. The courtroom was packed. Cameras, reporters, family, former friends, curious locals, survivors of domestic violence, law students, retired cops. Everyone wanted to witness the fall of the man who spent his life claiming he was above consequences. The prosecution's opening was devastating. They told the world he would kill them. He told the world he would make it look like an accident, and he did. This is the story of a man who used his badge as a weapon and women as property. The defense tried to counter. There is no physical evidence, no DNA, no eyewitness, no murder weapon, just jealousy, gossip, and a witch hunt. But the jury already sensed the truth. Something was deeply wrong with this man, and the evidence was only beginning. 3. The autopsy war. Experts battle over Kathleen's body. The heart of the case was forensic science. Two opposing autopsy interpretations. The first autopsy, 2004. Accident. Kathleen slipped in the bathtub. She drowned. There was no struggle. Case closed. But the bathtub had no water, no blood trails, no signs of slipping, no injury pattern consistent with the fall, no wet hair except near the scalp. And Kathleen had deep bruises, abrasions, a 1-inch head wound, marks consistent with restraint, an injury pattern consistent with a beating. The second autopsy, 2007, homicide, performed by Dr. Michael Baden, one of America's leading forensic experts. He concluded, this was a staged homicide, not an accident, not a fall. The defense attacked him. You're a TV doctor. You want publicity. The first autopsy said accidental, but Baden was unshakable. He walked the jury through each bruise, each fracture, each wound. He explained, this is not how people fall in bathtubs. It was a scientific dismantling of the idea that Kathleen's death was accidental. Rage. Prosecutors then laid out motive. Motive number 1, financial desperation. Kathleen was about to receive their house, half of his pension, child support, freedom from his control. Drew didn't want that. He liked money more than he liked freedom, and he liked freedom more than he liked consequences. Motive number 2, control. Kathleen was becoming independent. She was fighting him. She was no longer scared. He needed her gone. Motive number 3, pattern of threats. Multiple people testified. Kathleen said Drew would kill her. She said he would make it look like an accident. She said he told her exactly how he'd do it. These weren't random claims. These were consistent warnings from dozens of people over years of marriage. The prosecution argued this was planned, premeditated, cold, and the motive became crystal clear. 5. The bombshell witness, Stacy's pastor. One of the most important testimonies came from someone who had nothing to gain. Stacy's pastor. He said Stacy came to him, shaken, frightened, whispering, Drew killed Kathleen. She recounted how Drew admitted it. He told her he staged the bathroom. He wiped down the body. He placed Kathleen in the tub. He believed no one would question a cop. Then Stacy told the pastor something chilling. I'm scared I'm next. This was the moment the jury felt the full weight of the case. This wasn't just hearsay. It was a confession relayed to a man of God, a man with no bias, no agenda, no reason to lie. The defense tried to discredit him. Isn't this hearsay? Did you misunderstand her? Are you sure she wasn't emotional? And the pastor never wavered. He said she feared for her life. And her fear was justified. 6. Stacy's final days. The evidence that destroyed Drew. Witnesses testified. Stacy was preparing to leave. She consulted a divorce attorney. She confided in family. She was scared of Drew. She told people she knew he killed Kathleen. And then she vanished. Prosecutors argued, Stacy's disappearance is not the crime charged, but it is the key that unlocks the truth. The courtroom felt the weight of her absence. Her empty seat was louder than any testimony. She was the ghost that hovered over every moment. 7. Behavioral evidence. The arrogance that became proof. The jury watched video after video of Drew laughing while Stacy was missing. Smirking, flirting, mocking, making jokes. He told one reporter, she's where she wants to be. Not my problem. Another, she'll call. Eventually, in one interview, he literally spun around in his chair like a child being silly. The jury saw him for what he was, a man with no remorse, no grief, no concern, no fear, and no comfort. A narcissist so confident, he believed he could charm his way out of murder. Perhaps the most devastating witness was Drew's stepbrother, Thomas Morphy. He testified. Drew asked him for help. They carried a heavy blue container. It felt warm. Drew told him it contained a body. He panicked. He spiraled into guilt. He attempted suicide the next day. I know what I carried. I know what happened. Jury believed him. Because guilt that deep is impossible to fake. 9. The defense. A desperate last stand. Drew's attorneys played their final cards. There is no murder weapon. There is no DNA. There is no eyewitness. There is no Stacy. There is no smoking gun. But the jury saw something better than a smoking gun. A pattern. A pattern of threats, control, abuse, manipulation, rage, motive, opportunity, behavior, lies, intimidation, confessions, and consequences. Patterns speak louder than fingerprints. 10. Closing arguments. The moment the jury decides. The prosecution delivered a devastating closing. Every woman who loved him predicted he would kill them. One is dead. One is missing. He is the common denominator. Believe the women who can no longer speak. The defense tried to salvage the case. This is a witch hunt. There is no real evidence. This is storytelling, not law. But the jury saw through the performance. Drew Peterson wasn't being hunted. He was finally being held accountable. 11. The verdict. Justice arrives. On September 6, 2012, the jury returned. Reporters leaned forward. Families held their breath. The courtroom froze. The judge asked, "Impacted, has the jury reached a verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor." On the charge of first-degree murder, in the death of Kathleen Savio, guilty. There was no hesitation, no doubt, no confusion, just a single word that ended decades of manipulation. Drew Peterson sat expressionless. No tears, no sadness, no shock, just the tight clench of a jaw, belonging to a man who finally realized he wasn't invincible. 12. Sentencing. The weight of a year, lifetime. The judge had harsh words. Your depravity shocks the conscience. Drew was sentenced to 38 years in prison. Later, for attempting to hire a hitman to kill the prosecutor, he received an additional 40 years. Combined, 78 years in prison, a life sentence. The badge couldn't save him. The charm couldn't save him. The arrogance couldn't save him. Nothing could save him. 13. And still, Stacy remains missing. The trial ended. The cameras moved on. The country shifted its attention elsewhere. But one thing stayed the same. Where is Stacy Peterson? Her family continues the search. Her sister Cassandra never stopped. Volunteers still comb rural areas every year. Because justice wasn't complete. The courtroom gave Kathleen peace. But Stacy? She's still waiting. Some killers leave obvious signs. Some unravel publicly. Some erupt violently with no warning. But others, the most dangerous ones, hide their pathology behind masks so convincing that even the people closest to them never realize they're living with a predator until it's too late. Drew Peterson was one of those men. He wasn't the stereotype of a killer. He wasn't socially isolated. He wasn't unemployed. He wasn't a drifter. He wasn't mentally unstable in the traditional sense. He was charming, confident, funny, socially adept, a respected public figure, a decorated police sergeant. And that is exactly why he was so dangerous. This section is not about the crimes. This is about why he committed them. What shaped him? What drove him? What lived beneath the surface? What turned a suburban police officer into one of America's most chilling intimate partner killers? This is the psychological autopsy of Drew Walter Peterson. 1. The Mask. The charming, laughing, good guy cop. The first thing everyone notices about Drew Peterson is how effortlessly he could charm people. Coworkers liked him. Neighbors found him funny. Reporters found him charismatic. Women found him approachable. He had the traits of what psychologists call the social predator, a person who uses charm as a weapon, confidence as a disguise, humor as camouflage. People like this blend into crowds, belong to social groups, succeed in jobs, make quick friends, appear harmless, appear stable. They are wolves, wearing not just sheep's clothing, but entire sheep personalities. Drew's charm wasn't accidental. It wasn't natural. It was a tool to get access, trust, influence, obedience, control, women. This mask was so well crafted that even seasoned investigators missed the truth for decades. 2. Narcissistic personality traits, ego above everything. You cannot understand Drew Peterson without understanding the core psychological engine behind him. Narcissistic personality disorder tendencies. Not necessarily the clinical diagnosis, but the unmistakable behavioral pattern. ? He believed he was brilliant, superior, untouchable. He told reporters, cops don't get arrested. Entitlement. Rules didn't apply to him. He parked illegally. He cheated on wives. He manipulated reports. He intimidated judges. He bragged about bending the system. ? Need for admiration. He flirted during interviews. He sought the spotlight. ? He loved attention. He loved being infamous. Lack of empathy. He showed no grief for Kathleen, no sadness for Stacy, no concern for his children, no remorse for his crimes. He treated their pain as irrelevant. Exploitative behavior. He used women for sex, status, control, used coworkers as alibis, used his badge as a shield. Envy. He couldn't stand women leaving him, outgrowing him, or becoming independent. He wanted full control or nothing. These traits alone don't make someone a killer. But when combined with power, opportunity, a badge, and a lifetime of getting away with abuse, the result is catastrophic. 3. The badge. Authority as a weapon, not a duty. Being a police officer didn't just give Drew Peterson authority. It gave him insider knowledge, intimidation power, investigative training, cover access to vulnerable women, the ability to manipulate reports, the reputation of protector, but more dangerously, it validated his worldview. He believed he was above consequences. Multiple ex-wives reported he said versions of, "I'm a cop. No one will believe you. I can kill you and get away with it. If you leave me, I'll make it look like an accident." These weren't empty threats. These were statements of identity. For Drew, the badge wasn't a job. It was a free pass. A free pass for violence, infidelity, intimidation. He didn't protect people. He protected his ego. 4. Control, the central component of his psychology. Every behavior Drew exhibited flows from one psychological root: Control. He needed control like oxygen. Control over emotions, daily routines, movement, relationships, narratives, identity, life and death. To him, control wasn't a preference, it was a compulsion, a psychological law, a worldview so ingrained that losing control felt like death. This is why. He monitored phone calls, he installed surveillance, he stalked his own wives, he isolated them, he controlled finances, he threatened violence, he used children as leverage. Control was the lens through which he saw every interaction. And the moment a woman tried to break free, he viewed it as betrayal, an attack on his identity, a threat that needed to be eliminated. 5. The cycle of abuse. How he groomed, broke, and rebuilt victims. Drew's relationships followed a pattern seen in many domestic predators. A cycle of idealization, over-the-top affection, gifts, attention, charm, validation. Victims felt chosen. Isolation, cutting ties, discouraging friendships, creating emotional dependency, financial control, monitoring movements. Victims felt trapped. Devaluation, insults, intimidation, gaslighting, threats, jealousy, anger. Victims felt worthless. Control, rules, monitoring, manipulation, emotional punishment, violence. Victims felt afraid. Reinforcement, short periods of kindness to reset the cycle and keep them from leaving. Victims felt confused. Every wife experienced this cycle. Carol, Vicki, Kathleen, Stacy. Some escaped. Some couldn't. Some survived. Some didn't. He never chose strong, independent partners. He chose women who were young, vulnerable, isolated, or already insecure, because they could be shaped, groomed, controlled, and eventually destroyed. 6. Misogyny. Women as property. Drew Peterson was not simply controlling. He was deeply misogynistic. To him, women were objects. Wives were possessions. Their identities depended on him. Their value came from obedience. Disobedience was betrayal. Independence was a threat. He didn't love women. He owned them. He treated wives like employees he could fire, property he could replace, tools he could use, enemies he could eliminate. This was not romance, not partnership, not love. This was ownership. This was domination. This was patriarchy, weaponized. 7. The rage beneath the surface. People who knew Drew said, he never seemed angry. That's because his anger was internal, controlled. His rage was strategic. He didn't explode randomly. He waited. He calculated. He weaponized anger to achieve goals. He used intimidation over affection, fear over reason, threats over communication. But the most chilling part, he didn't view violence as violence. He viewed it as problem-solving, discipline, control, justice, correction, restoration of dominance. He believed he was in the right, every time, without exception. This is the logic of a sociopathic abuser. I'm not the problem. They are. 8. The trigger when women tried to leave. Every major escalation in Drew's violence occurred when a wife attempted to leave him. Wife number 1, Carol, tried to escape, verbal abuse. Wife number 2, Vicki, tried to become independent. Threats. Wife number 4, Kathleen, tried to divorce. She died. This is psychologically consistent. with high-control domestic predators. Leaving triggers: abandonment rage, humiliation, loss of control, ego injury, panic, entitlement to revenge. In Drew's mind, leaving him was the ultimate betrayal. So when Kathleen and Stacy tried, he didn't just react emotionally. He responded with strategy. He planned, he staged, he executed, he covered up, he erased. Because to him, ending a woman's life was a logical solution to a loss of control. 9. Why Drew stayed calm. Psychopathic traits. Drew's lack of emotion confused the public. How could a man laugh while his wife was missing? How could he flirt with reporters while under suspicion for murder? Why didn't he panic? Why didn't he hide? Why didn't he show fear? Because people like Drew do not feel guilt the way normal people do. He exhibited traits of superficial charm, lack of remorse, shallow emotions, manipulativeness, pathological lying, impulsivity, grandiosity, lack of empathy. This doesn't mean he was a full clinical psychopath, but he had psychopathic traits aligned with many intimate partner killers. Traits that allowed him to murder without panic, stage a crime scene calmly, sleep afterward, speak confidently, joke publicly, go on TV, ask a reporter out, believe he'd win. To him, murder was an inconvenience, not a moral burden. That is the hallmark of a predatory personality. 10. The God complex, believing he was untouchable. By the time Drew was arrested, he had spent 30 years getting away with threats, violence, infidelity, manipulation, staged scenes, intimidation, psychological abuse, grooming, control. The community admired him. The department protected him. The system failed to check him. He developed what psychologists call a God complex, a belief that he was smarter, stronger, more powerful, more important, above consequences. That's why he joked during interviews, mocked detectives, flirted with journalists, said no body, no crime, believed he could kill again, believed he could hire a hitman, believed he outsmarted everyone. His downfall wasn't emotional. It was strategic failure. He overplayed his confidence. He underestimated witnesses. He underestimated forensic science. He underestimated the public. He thought he was a god. The trial revealed he was simply a predator who finally ran out of women to silence and lies to hide behind. 11. The fate of men like Drew. Men with Drew Peterson's psychological profile rarely stop at one victim. This is not speculation. It is statistical fact. Patterns show that high-control abusers escalate, threats become reality, violence increases, manipulations become less subtle, leaving becomes dangerous. Drew didn't snap, he evolved. Every marriage made him more confident, more controlling, more violent, more entitled, more dangerous. Kathleen wasn't his first victim, and Stacy wasn't his last. He destroyed identities, destroyed families, destroyed lives. And he did it with a smile. That smile was the warning no one recognized. 12. What made Drew so dangerous? If you strip away the badge, the wives, the suburban house, and the media circus, at the core of Drew Peterson is a simple truth. He believed people existed to serve him. Women existed to obey him. Consequences existed for everyone but him. This is what made him lethal. Intelligence. He wasn't stupid. He was calculated. Confidence. He believed he would win. Charm. He could easily disarm people. Authority. The badge gave him cover. Control. His relationships were prisons. Lack of empathy. Pain meant nothing to him. Entitlement. He believed he deserved compliance. Predatory patience. He waited until the perfect moment to act. Ability to manipulate the system. He exploited loopholes for decades. History of getting away with abuse. Each success emboldened him. This is the psychological blueprint of a man capable of killing, not once, but twice. 13. The final psychological profile. If you condense his traits, you get narcissistic entitlement, antisocial tendencies, misogynistic worldview, predatory grooming patterns, coercive control, pathological lying, lack of empathy, violent impulses, financial motive, rage triggered by abandonment, a dangerous combination. Not because any one trait defines a killer, but because together they form a personality driven by domination and incapable of remorse. Drew Peterson wasn't an accident. He wasn't a mystery. He wasn't a misunderstood man. He was a predator who used charm to lure victims, control to break them, and violence to eliminate them when they were no longer compliant. This is the truth he spent decades hiding. This is the truth the trial exposed. This is the truth his victims tried to warn us about. Some stories end neatly, with justice, with closure, with answers. This is not one of those stories, because the Drew Peterson case is not just a story about murder. It is a story about warning signs ignored, systems that failed, patterns overlooked, voices silenced, and the devastating cost of letting one man believe he was untouchable. This final chapter is not about Drew. It's about what he left behind. Broken families, unanswered questions, a missing mother, a dead wife, children who will live their entire lives carrying the weight of their father's choices, and a country forced to confront how easily a man with a badge can hide the darkest parts of himself in plain sight. This is the legacy of Drew Peterson. 1. The scars left behind. When the courtroom emptied and the cameras left and reporters moved on to the next tragedy, the people who truly mattered were the ones left behind. Kathleen's family, her siblings, her parents, her children, finally received confirmation of what they already knew. She didn't slip. She didn't fall. She didn't drown. She was murdered. Her death robbed her children of the mother they should have grown up with. It robbed her parents of their daughter. It robbed her siblings of closure for years. The courtroom gave them truth. But truth is not the same as healing. Stacy's family. For them, there was no closure. Only a wound that refuses to close. Her sister Cassandra still searches. Every year, every season, every lead, every hint. Because Stacy's story hasn't ended. It's frozen. And the only person who knows the truth refuses to speak. Drew's children. Perhaps the deepest tragedy is the impact on the children. They live with shame, confusion, fear, trauma, contradictory memories, the weight of carrying the last name Peterson. Some still struggle to reconcile the father they loved with the man the world now knows him to be. Some defend him. Some reject him. Some stay silent. None of them are untouched. This is the real cost. Of the monster hiding behind the badge. 2. The system that failed them. It is impossible to tell this story without confronting the failures that enabled it. Failure number 1. The police department. Repeated calls from Kathleen and other women were ignored, minimized, or brushed aside. Co-workers saw red flags. They heard Drew's threats. They witnessed his behavior. But he was one of them. And in policing, that sometimes means the benefit of the doubt becomes a shield for abusers. Failure number 2. The courts. Kathleen filed for protection. She documented abuse. She predicted her death. But judges treated it as messy divorce drama. They underestimated her. They underestimated him. And she paid with her life. Failure number 3. Investigators in 2004. The first autopsy was superficial. The scene was misread. The injuries misunderstood. The questions, too few. The assumptions, too generous. Drew's uniform, his title, his authority, influenced the conclusions. And because of that, he killed again. Failure number 4. Society's perception. When a woman is emotional, she is dismissed. When a man is charming, he is believed. Kathleen's fear wasn't taken seriously. Stacy's grooming wasn't recognized. Drew's charisma overshadowed his cruelty. This is not unique to Bolingbrook. This happens everywhere. This is the story of a pattern that repeats across cultures, communities, and decades. And it is one of the reasons domestic violence remains one of the least prevented crimes in America. 3. The law that changed because of him. Drew Peterson didn't just shape headlines, he shaped the law. Because of this case, Illinois passed and fined the hearsay rule for unavailable victims, better known nationwide as the Drew Peterson Law. It allows courts to admit statements from victims who cannot testify because the defendant made them unavailable. This law gave voice to Kathleen, Stacy, future victims, countless women whose pleas were ignored. It represents progress born from tragedy. A tool against abusers who rely on silence. A way to let victims speak from beyond the grave. A law that should have never been needed in the first place. 4. The unfinished story. Where is Stacy? Even with Drew in prison, even with Kathleen's killer named, even with justice served in one case, there remains one question that refuses to fade. Where is Stacy Peterson? Years have passed, leads have gone cold, searches have failed, quarries have been combed, lakes have been drained, forensic teams have investigated dozens of sites. Every time someone thinks they found a clue, hope rises and collapses again. But the truth is simple. Someone out there knows. And that someone sits in a prison cell, smiling at reporters and refusing to talk. Until Stacy is found, the story is not complete. It is a haunting echo left unanswered. 5. Drew behind bars, the final act of a predator. Drew Peterson is now an old man. His days of fame, power, and control are gone. He lives in a cell. Limited movement. Limited contact. Limited freedom. He no longer commands fear. No longer commands women. No longer commands attention. He is surrounded by concrete, steel, and silence. But even in prison, his narcissism survives. Reports say flirts with guards, brags about his past, minimizes his crimes, claims the system framed him, maintains his innocence, enjoys being recognized. In his mind, he is still the main character. He will die believing he was the victim of a conspiracy. He will never admit guilt, never confess where Stacy is, never acknowledge what he took from the world. That is the nature of predators like him. They die exactly as they lived, lying. 6. The lessons this case forces us to learn. This is not just a crime story. This is a warning. A lesson. A mirror held up to society, showing us exactly where we fail. Lesson 1. Believe women. When a woman says, "He will kill me," listen, document, investigate, protect her. Kathleen and Stacy predicted their deaths. No one listened. Lesson 2. Charisma is not innocence. Abusers don't always look like monsters. They look like neighbors, co-workers, officers, husbands, fathers, charming men with perfect smiles. Drew seemed friendly. He was still deadly. Lesson 3. A badge is not a shield from violence. Law enforcement officers can be abusers too, and the system must learn to police its own. Lesson 4. Patterns are evidence. When multiple women across decades say the same thing, that is not coincidence. That is not drama. That is a pattern. And patterns reveal truth. Lesson 5. Silence is a weapon. Predators rely on silence. Silence from victims. Silence from families. Silence from police. Silence from society. Breaking that silence is the first step toward justice. 7. The final words. The ghosts that speak. Kathleen Savio's voice echoes through every courtroom transcript. "He's going to kill me." Stacy Peterson's voice echoes through every plea from her sister. "If I disappear, it was him." These women were not hysterical. They were not dramatic. They were right. Their warnings were prophecies that came true. And because of the law that now bears Drew's name, those voices will never be ignored again. But their families still wait for full closure, for healing, for answers, for Stacy to be found. Until then, their story remains unfinished. Their voices remain unburied. Their truth remains unshaken. 8. Your role. True crime is not entertainment. A way to give victims a voice when the world refused to listen. A way to honor their warnings when the system dismissed them. You amplify the voices of Kathleen. Every woman who escaped. Every woman who didn't. Every survivor who was doubted. This is not sensationalism. This is preservation. This is accountability. Their stories deserve to be told forever. And now you have told them. Before we end tonight's documentary, I want to acknowledge something important. Stories like this aren't just headlines. They're warnings. They're lessons. They're the voices of victims who can no longer speak for themselves. If you believe Kathleen and Stacy deserved better, if you believe the system should have protected them, if you believe their stories must never be forgotten, then please, don't let this video disappear into the algorithm. Your engagement ensures that their voices keep echoing long after the credits fade. So if this story moved you, if you learned something, if you want more long-form deep dives into cases like this, like this video. It helps more people hear their story. Subscribe so you never miss another documentary. And share your thoughts below. Do you believe Drew Peterson will ever reveal what happened to Stacy? Will justice ever be complete? I read every comment, and your voice is part of honoring theirs. Thank you for watching, for caring, and for keeping their memories alive. Stay safe, stay aware, and I'll see you in the next documentary.